I'm going to be testing my live streaming capability here, and so if this is a little bit rough, then please forgive any bumps and bruises that we have along the way. My name is Tabor, and we're going to be live streaming today. Just a couple little warm-up activities that I do before I start drawing in here in Photoshop. And so these can be any sort of activity that you use just to get your arm moving and working before you start doing something that's a little bit more important to you. And so here I've got a number of examples that are already up in layers that I've used in the past. And so I'm just going to run through a bunch of these really quick. Maybe not all of them, because for instance this one turned out to take a lot longer than I thought, and so that's not really sufficient for a warm-up unless you did just a couple of these or you were a very, very quick sketch artist. Here's some cylinders that are started here. Here's some more complicated cylinders. Got some ellipses, circles, and that was just my list. Okay, so let me go ahead and start in just with one of these more simple warm-ups. So just drawing some straight lines to start off with, and I've got a custom pencil brush that I've made. You can use any old brush that you want, but really I'm just looking to get my arm moving by doing some sort of repetitive exercise that starts my body moving and starts me thinking about drawing something a little bit more ambitious. So straight lines is a great one. If you're not already completely confident drawing your straight lines, this is a great way to start your drawings. You can see that, for instance, like on these endpoints, I've got a little bit of a tail on these lines. Maybe in this grid that I just created here, they're not completely 100% straight. And so if you want to gain confidence, you've got to attack those deficiencies, and this is one way to do it. So before you start drawing something a little bit more important, you just practice this stuff. If you get it wrong, who cares? It's just your warm-up. Okay? You can also work on the pen pressure, on your line pressure. You could do this traditionally as well if you wanted to. Just grab some paper and do this before you start in on an illustration. You can work on trying to hit pre-prescribed markers. So for instance, I can make these two markers here, and then I can ghost the line a couple times in preparation for putting down my line, and then try to hit it. We can see I missed a little bit, but practice makes perfect, so you try again. Do a couple ghosts. That time very nearly hit it, and without very much bend in the line on the tips too, so that's a lot better. So we do that a few times. Now Photoshop has the capability to rotate the screen, but I've also got a Cintiq in front of me which rotates the screen manually, and I can rotate it on my desk, and so I don't typically rotate the canvas directly, but you can rotate the canvas to make this a little bit more easy to accomplish. So far most of my lines have been fairly horizontal. I've got some verticals up here, but if I wanted to try to hit more interesting targets, I could do that as well. And if I wasn't completely comfortable drawing at this diagonal angle, actually that one lines up pretty nicely with my arm, I could always rotate my canvas to get it into a nicer orientation, so I could try to hit those lines. We can see that even just within this short session of drawing, the quality of my lines has gone up, and it only took about a minute or two to do that. So you can really see the benefit of warming up even just in this tiny little example here. Other things we can do for straight lines, if you had it in your mind to do some perspective drawing or something like that, we could do some sort of fake vanishing point exercise. So this will be my vanishing point right here. And just imagining that I'm sketching some sort of grid over on this left-hand side, I'm just going to try to freehand radians to that vanishing point, but without ever reaching the vanishing point. And so typically on a composition, you're only going to have something like this kind of area that you're working with. Your vanishing point is going to be way, way off your canvas or way off your paper. And so you want to get used to drawing these sort of very quick vanishing point grids to an imaginary point that's just in your imagination way off the side of the paper. So you can do it like that. Or you can do it the opposite way, where we're going to draw over on this right hand side and we're going to try to draw from the point. I find this to be a lot easier, honestly. Something like that, and trying to not actually hit it. And you can see that these aren't perfect. Like if I trace this one, it goes way over here. If I trace this one, it goes way off over there. And to keep yourself accountable, You do want to sometimes measure these and see what your accuracy is like, but don't just use, let me just grab here, don't just use like a line tool and do this, because that would completely defeat the purpose of your practice. The practice in this case, or at least for me, is to get comfortable with hand drawing tools, not to try to just use the perfect digital tools that we have available in Photoshop. Okay, so that's some stuff that we can do there, and that would be my first warm-up, which is the straight line warm-up. Let me go on to the next one. So here's an example page that I've got, and this one's a lot more intimidating. This is to make some free-handed curved lines, preferably with a maybe an ink brush or something like that, but to try to hit all three of these targets simultaneously. And this can be really, really tough to do. And honestly, I do not hit them most of the time, but let's just try and see. So this could help your confidence when doing inking or doing cartoon illustration or whatever it is that you want to do with drawing. So I'm going to try to ghost these three lines particularly hard because my hand gets in the way. Let's see. Ooh. Oh my goodness. Very, very lumpy over here. Almost hit it in the middle and missed low on the right hand side, so we try that again. Let's do an overhand line this time. Nope. And try again. Let's go something a little bit more subtle like that. Ooh, very nearly. A little bit wobbly, but very nearly got that one. And so you just make a few targets like this and try to hit your line. This is similar to the type of thing that you would need to do if you're doing some inking of an illustration, or really even if you're drawing anything even remotely organic. And so it can be good for your confidence, or at least good for getting your hand moving before you start your real illustrations. Okay, so you can try that one if you like. This one is particularly hard for me, so I try to return to it fairly often. I'm not much of a inking illustrator anyway. I tend to make a lot of extraneous extra lines as I draw like that, which is a bad habit. And so if you want to try to break that kind of sketchy, hairy kind of lined habit, then this is a good way to try to approach that. Okay. Also, each time you do this, try to fill up a page with it. Don't just do 2 or 3. Try to fill up an entire canvas full, because if you don't do something of that scale, you're really not getting very much practice going. And so if it's something that's a weakness that you have, something that you need to work on, really take the time to practice it fully so that you get used to the motions involved, so that you can drill this into muscle memory. I'm going to try some different angles here, because that muscle memory is going to see you through in the end. That's when you're going to get really confident, when you're going to be able to do a large volume of work with the least amount of pain. Ooh, not too bad. Okay. Now these 3-point lines are pretty challenging. In fact, you can do this with 2, as long as you anticipate making a curve between them as opposed to a straight line. So in this case, I've got the same sort of setup as I did with my previous straight line example, and this time I'm just going to try to make an overhand arcing curve between the two. Okay, and we could do that a few times, so I'll do an underhand arcing curve here. Okay, wow, really missed the first one, but nailed the second one, strangely enough. And we could try to do this vertically as well. And so, in fact, with this one, I think I'm going to rotate just a little bit here. And it all depends on your drawing proficiency, on how comfortable you are. In general, and this is what I was taught from a more traditional background in drawing, you want to try to engage your shoulder and arm as much as possible in drawing. And so if you've got a large surface to draw, then that's ideal. If you have a very small surface to draw, that can be much, much harder to do. But what I try to do is to not engage my finger muscles individually or my wrist muscles so much. I try to get as much of my arm involved as possible, and I find that that gives me smoother, more continuous lines in general. Also because I have a fairly shaky hand, so the tiny detail types of movements like this they tend to come out not so great for me anyway. And so if you have any of that kind of confidence issues or coordination issues, then this could help you out. Alright, so that's a curved line example there. So let's take a look at some of the others I've got here. What else do I have? Oh, circles. Circles are great. Circles are maybe one of the first ones that you should start out with because they're real easy. Just about everybody can draw a circle, and if you have any intention of drawing professionally or even really just as a hobby, you should be able to freehand a circle fairly comfortably. Okay, so I'm going to zoom into a corner of my canvas to start out with, do a couple tests, and then try to make a nice confident circle. A little bit ovular, in fact, there. So after you're done drawing these circles, you should test these out with maybe a ratio constrained marquee selection. So I'll just show you that real quick. If I grab elliptical marquee and I hold shift, it will make a perfect circle selection. And I can test that against the ones that I just drew, so we can see now that I've got this perfect example next to my hand-drawn one, that we've got little imperfections here, here, and here. So it's weird. I've got a triangular shaped circle here. Kind of strange. And we could test it against this other one over here, and we can see that one's very clearly egg-shaped. Okay? So that can be good to test your fidelity of your circles after you've drawn a bunch of them. And typically what you're going to find is that if you compare the circles that you draw freehand against a perfect circle, you're going to make the same sorts of mistakes over and over again until you're aware of them, and then you can compensate and make different mistakes. Okay? And then those are going to become repetitious, and you're going to have the same kind of mistake over and over there as well, and you can compensate a little bit less or a little bit more in an opposite direction until eventually you get to some really confident circles. So these today all look fairly short and squat to me, so I don't know, maybe I'm sitting differently, maybe it's because I'm streaming this, who knows. But knowing that, I could try to then draw these taller and thinner. So let me make a new page. And I did that without really measuring them because it looked fairly plain to me. So I'll try to draw taller and thinner. So actually that's not so bad. I mean, maybe that's a little bit tall, but now that compensation really helped me. So I try to draw taller and thinner, and that one looks pretty good. Okay, I want to see how close I got with that one because I'm liking that. Okay, let's see. Not bad at all. Really a very small little area that goes outside of the bounds of a perfect circle. And so compensating a little bit like that can help. You should notice that I'm trying to put this down in one solid stroke. If the endpoints don't quite match up, well, you know, that could be a concern if you're doing really nicely proportioned smooth circles all the time. But if you're not up to that point yet, don't worry about that. You just want to get the proportions right at first, and for instance, like these don't really match up at all, but like, who cares? Just try to get a nicely proportioned, smooth and confident circle first. There's a very inconsistent line weight for that one. Okay, so we can try that again. And there's all sorts of qualities that we can push for in these circles to try to get them as nice as possible. But again, since this is a warm-up before you're going to do your real drawing, you want to attack your deficiencies, you want to get your arm moving. So just push as much as you can towards the outcome that you want. Measure it afterward. Don't beat yourself up too much. This should be over fairly quickly, and then you move on to doing your actual drawing session. So that's circles. Then we have ellipses, and ellipses start to get into a little bit more three-dimensional drawing. So if you don't know how to draw an ellipse, it has a major and minor axis, and you can see that, for instance, on this one here. Major would be the long one, minor would be the short one, and if you're going to try to make it look like a pancake or a coin flip, as in this sequence going down the side of the page here, then the major axis never changes amongst all of these. So all of these, if I draw, and I'm holding shift to draw cheated straight lines now, so don't think that I suddenly got way better at drawing. The major axis shouldn't change its size. The minor axis should, and you should try to get a continually smooth stroke around the outside, and you can see how three-dimensional that looks. Okay? So let's try some ellipses here. And you can draw the axis first if you want to, that you're going to draw your ellipse along, and then draw your ellipse, or you could just start freehanding your ellipse. You could even draw both of them if you want to try to get a very, very controlled target, and that will of course make it much harder. Okay, so if you're just starting out, try to draw a perfect circle which is a little bit squished. So kind of squished this more on the bottom than on the top, but so you try to draw something near to a perfect circle that's a little bit squished, probably a little bit more like that, and then try to draw a circle that's the same width as that but a little bit shorter. Okay, so same width as that but a little bit shorter. Oop, I think my pen lost connection. There we go. Okay, and then you can try doing that again, a little bit shorter than that. Okay, how about a little bit shorter than that? And try to keep the same width. You can see this gets more and more pancake-like as I go. Okay? Until you get down to something that is as thin as you can possibly make it while still making an ellipse. And this can be really, really tough. So I'm going to give myself a guideline here. And I'm going to try to ghost it. I could probably do thinner than that, but that's a fairly good example. At least I hit the major axis line there. Let's try one more underneath. A little bit thinner than that. Oh, didn't even get thinner. Let's try. Very tough. See, that one shrunk a lot compared to those other ones. And so there's a lot of ways that this can go wrong as well. And so once again, if this is something that you need to work on, then use it in your warm-up period. You know, get your arm moving. You're going to make lousy drawings, and that's fine because you've just woken up or you've just started working in the afternoon or whatever it is for you. And so you've got full excusability in making terrible drawings for 15 minutes or so while you're practicing something. You don't have to beat yourself up about it, and then you can start working on something that's a little bit more important to you. But practice good technique as much as possible. I'm trying as much as I can to just put down the bare minimum number of lines to make these ellipses, rather than just scribbling like crazy over these ellipses and making tons and tons. So for instance, if you start doing this, okay, don't do that. All you've done is mess up the drawing. It hasn't helped at all. It hasn't made it more clear, more obvious what it is that you were trying to do. You can see a few times in here that I've got some extra lines around here. But mostly that's coming from the fact that I'm trying to ghost these lines before I put them down. And so I'm moving my mouse around, but I'm not touching the screen because I'm trying to get the motion down. And then I start touching down. And as soon as I start seeing the opaque line go down, I try to complete that ellipse and lift off. Okay? So don't scribble and etch like crazy, and especially don't do this. I've seen lots of my students do this, where you start drawing this ellipse, but then you stop and you start going through and trying to fix it a lot, This is a bad habit, okay? It makes the lines look hairy, okay? As you can see, it almost looks like a furry egg now. Don't do that. That's a bad habit, okay? All right, let's go ahead and move on to cylinders. So cylinders right here, I've got a few example ones. This is really just two ellipses connected together. And so I've got either two ellipses that are identical or two ellipses that are trying to give some feeling of perspective. So for instance, we could see in, let's say, this one right here, I've got somewhat of a perspective effect. This one is wider and thinner, and this one is fatter and rounder, but also smaller, and it gives it a small feeling of perspective. Then like these up here are virtually identical. This one over on the side is virtually identical. So you can do it either way. The more simple way is to just do two ellipses that are exactly the same and connect them together with lines on the sides of them. So let's try some of those. This could be good if you're trying to practice your three-dimensional drawing, if you're trying to get into maybe construction, as in anatomical construction or object environment construction. So I'm just going to make two ellipses like that and then connect them together We can see this a little bit trapezoid shaped. Right? A little bit trapezoid shaped like that. And so I'm going to take another crack at it. Let's make another one right over here. Okay, one ellipse, two ellipses, and then we can line them up. Okay, and that's a little bit better, a little bit more like a marshmallow or something like that. So if you're familiar with doing this, then you can just fill a page up with ellipses and cylinders and whatnot. If you're not familiar with this, then look up some instructional materials, try to understand what it is the instructor is telling you to do, and then try to practice it with good form, because you don't want to practice it with bad form. You don't want to practice it in the way that you're most comfortable, because then you're not going to be improving. Okay, I'm leaving the profile of most of these ellipses virtually identical, so right now they are just kind of like a 45-degree coin flip, or these are a little bit thinner, these ones that I started off here. But you can really push it if you want to. So we can try to get a cylinder that appears to be moving very, very far away from us, like this. Okay, where I've drawn a wider but thinner ellipse on the top here, and I've drawn a more round but smaller ellipse on the bottom here, and then connected them together. And you can see it gives us a feeling of perspective like that. To try to push it even more than that, we've got to kind of imagine that this is like a toilet paper tube or something, where we can see directly into it like that. And that's not a very good example, but I think maybe you can get the idea, where you draw two overlapping, there we go, that's going to be better, two overlapping circles pretty much, and you connect them together on just the little parts there that are able to. And if I were to darken in this line over here, then we could see that all of this is interior, and that would be visible straight through on the outside there. Okay, so something like that. So if you're familiar with a little bit of three-dimensional faked construction like this, then you can do something like that, and that could be a really good warm-up for you. We could also do this with cubes. I'm not really used to doing this with cubes, but we could try that. Okay, so let's just imagine I'm going to start with a fairly flat one. So these are mostly straight lines. So I'm going to just barely bend this first side, and I'll allow this second one to come back like this. And then I can connect them all up. And we could try to tumble this cube now. So tumbling three-dimensional objects is definitely one that I try occasionally. So let's try to like rotate this thing down this way or something. So I'm going to start off with that front face again. I'm going to try to imagine this thing turning in 3D. Okay, so like this. And I can just connect them all up. And like I said, I'm not going to really instruct in this stream. I'm just going to show the warm-ups that I do most often. And so if you don't know how to construct three-dimensional cuboid objects, then there's a lot of information out there, probably even other YouTube channels that can give you some instruction on that. But I'm just practicing the things that I know. So that one didn't turn too much from that last one. So let's try to go farther. I'm going to try to take this side and make it even more vertical. Okay, and getting a really sharp angle here now. There we go. And so that previous side is now turning towards me as this thing is tumbling, as if it were a block maybe knocked off a shelf or something. So we can kind of see a progression there, and I can see that this one, sorry, number 3 here, is too thin, so it needs to be expanded that way if it's going to keep a cubic kind of form. And also number 2, the base is a little bit wider than the top, and so it could be corrected a little bit like that. A little bit like that. Now, since these are supposed to be warm-ups, I would caution you against doing a lot of correction in these drawings. Really, if you notice there's a problem, get it in the next drawing. You know, don't go back constantly and erase and fix and everything like that. But you do need to know where the deficiencies are. So it is helpful to stop and take a look at these things, but don't go crazy perfectionist and try to fix these up. So for instance, both of those two, I could see were not wide enough in that direction, and now they look much more cube shaped than they did. And this last one, I can't quite tell. Can't quite tell what's wrong with it, but there is something. It looks a little bit rectangular. I can't quite tell which direction that's in. Okay, but tumbling objects like that can be a great one. Let me do one more. We'll do a pill. Pill is a great one to tumble. So pill is just two spheres connected together. And if it helps you, we can also imagine a median line, which is an ellipse in the middle of that. So let's try to tumble this a little bit. So I'll take the top part and bring it a little bit towards, and the bottom part and bring it a little bit away. And probably it would be a little bit shorter, more like this. So I have this sphere way out there. And then we could imagine that as this is the median line, here is the disk that would go right through the center of that. I'm trying to make sure that this distance is shortening as this thing is tumbling towards me. And so we can make this one even larger, and this one even smaller and closer together now that I realize that. Here we go. And I'm also just kind of letting these things rotate freely so that I'm not being so cautious and perfectionist about it. I'm not keeping it on like a perfectly vertical axis. I'm just letting them rotate freely along. So here would be the two spheres. I'm going to erase the bottom of that sphere so I can try to more accurately guess where the middle disk would go. I think it would be something like that, biased pretty far down the pill. So something along those lines, and this looks a little bit pointy as well on the bottom. Okay, and so we could keep going with that. So I could try to like maybe pass through the center like this. Now I've gone a little bit too far down. Let me move that over there. And we could pass through, and now this can be on the right hand side like this. And that's a bit malformed. There we go, cutting that off. Nice round shape over here. And somewhere in the middle, which I think would be right around here or so. That's where that disc can be. Blah. Lots of problems with that, but that's why these are warm-ups, okay? So any shape that you feel comfortable constructing, any like three-dimensional shape that you can imagine turning in 3D space, you could do a warm-up like this to try to get that tumbling in free space. And I find this is a really great warm-up if I'm doing traditional animation or something like that, because that's all turning volumes and moving them and compressing them, squash and stretching them in 3D space. So let me see if there are any others that I haven't tried. Well, there are these. Now, this was a recommendation from ControlPaint.com, which I love that guy, by the way. He recommended to draw from observation something pretty mundane. So I've got like, for instance, a water bottle that I could place on my desk and I could draw from observation, or sticky pad, which is pretty easy. But the idea was to do this directly from one-to-one observation. And so his, as you can see down here, recommendation was to do 20 of these, and I drew 10 of them, felt pretty confident, but was also bored, and so stopped there. But his recommendation was to draw 20 of those. So if you're about to do a lot of observational drawing, that could be a really good thing to do. And I'm not going to do that right now because I want to wrap this up since we're just doing a test. And another one of his recommendations as well was to draw 25 variants of something, and I think I went a little bit crazy with it, of drawing 25 variants of trees, but that's another thing that you could also do. Warm-ups that are a little bit less about drawing, you could try to do, for instance, a paint-based warm-up. So here I've got a noisy paintbrush, okay, and I could try to do a value scale with this using pen pressure, which I'm not really very good at but I also don't practice it. So there we go for a first try, trying to get it from the darkest dark, and we could do this a couple times, to the lightest light using my pen pressure. And I'm not resampling, I'm just trying to go one way to control this pen pressure, but it's fairly fun. And if you're very much into colors, you could do some color mixing as your warm-up. So we could say, I don't know, another thing I really don't practice all that much, and so I'll get this reddish color here, and we'll go for a yellowish color here, something like that. And we could just mix these two into a value scale as practice. We could also do like maybe a little bit more involved color picking or color estimation. So here, this color in the middle, I could try to spread out now that I like that, spread it back in, and try to get a nice smooth gradation of color throughout there. That could be nice to do. Or you could try to target this a little bit more. So for instance, I'm going to grab a blue color, and let's go for a green. I'll go for a desaturated green like this. So now that I've got these two targets, let me try to guess what the middle color is going to be before I mix these two up. So I know I've got a lot of gray. The green is a lot lighter, the blue is a lot darker. I'm hoping we land somewhere in the middle here, but I don't think we will, because I think the blue is going to be much more dominant. So I'm going to push this up a little bit. Is that an appropriate middle ground color? I think it's going to be somewhere around here. Somewhere around there, fairly desaturated in fact, but I would want it to go like over here as a middle ground color. So I'm going to just dob that over here, and then let's try. Let's do some mixing. I think it's going to be a lot more gray than I anticipated. Okay. Uh-oh. Gotten it all the way over to my color swatch. And so after a little bit of mixing here, it kind of depends on which one I do last, I've gotten this color, and we can see that my guess was way off. But that could help you to get a little bit more color accuracy. If you were trying to do something like that, you could guess whatever this mixture of color could be, and you could even do more complicated ones where you take 3 or more different values and try to make a color scheme out of them. So maybe, let's see, I'm just going to pick randomly, because likely this isn't going to look very good for a start, but I might want to try to make something nice out of them. Like say, I've got those 3 colors. They're almost RGB, but this is a little bit more maroon. So for instance, I could take a little bit of that blue over here, and now I've got this purple and blue color. Take a little bit of this blue over this yellow, and I've got a slightly more grayish. I think I'm going to go for more green, so I'm actually going to push this up here, something like that. And you could end up getting a color scheme that might work. I think that was much better when it was yellow, but you get the idea, where we can just kind of play around and push color around if that's what you're into and if that's what you're intending to do. Yeah, okay. But you get the picture. If that's what you're into, then you can use that for warm-up. My whole point is that you need something like this before you begin your drawing session, so that you are warmed up, so that you're prepared to make decisions about shape and color, so that you're not just coming out of the gate cold and you're doing your drawings at your worst possible state of readiness. Okay? Alright, well, thank you for joining me. Maybe we'll do more of these. This is really just a test for our Facebook group. If you're just arriving, I'm going to be doing live streaming on Facebook for animationresources.org. You can check them out if you're interested in animation historical preservation, and we're going to start doing some instructional materials and roundtable discussions. And I just wanted to make sure that my live streaming capability was up to scratch. So I'm going to take a look at this, see if I can hear myself, and if I'm completely silent through the whole thing, I'll do a little face palm and I'll try again. Alright, well, thank you for joining me, and have a great day.